40 years old, Darnell Jackson was a man who understood the value of stability. As a warehouse supervisor in St. Louis, his salary was a steady $57,000 a year. Not a fortune, but enough to build a life on. It was honest work, managing the flow of goods and the sweat of good people, and it paid the bills. More than that, it paid for the life his wife, Kiara, wanted to project. Their combined household income was $88,000, a sum that felt substantial on paper but evaporated into a mist of lease payments, credit card bills, and the constant, unspoken pressure to appear more successful than they were. The house, a modest but sturdy brick bungalow in North County, had been his father's pride and joy. It was the one truly solid thing in his life, a foundation of paid-off mortgage and cherished memories. But at 10:41 p.m. on a Tuesday night in October, the foundation of his marriage cracked clean through. He was standing in the shadows of the hallway just outside the bright rectangle of the kitchen doorway, a glass of water in his hand. He'd been about to step in when he heard Kiara's voice, low and conspiratorial, laced with a familiar, weary condescension. She was on the phone, her back to him, leaning against the cool granite of the $4,000 countertop she had insisted on 2 years prior. "I know, Mama. I know it's taking forever." Kiara sighed. Her fingers traced the rim of a wine glass. "But we have to be patient. It's a process." A pause. Darnell felt the ice in his glass begin to melt, a slow drip against his fingers. He knew who was on the other end of the line. Brenda, his mother-in-law, a woman whose approval was a currency Kiara was always trying to earn. No, he doesn't suspect a thing. He just goes to his little job, comes home, and thinks this is all for him. She let out a small, bitter laugh that sounded like cracking ice. It was a sound he knew well. He should have turned away. He should have made a noise, cleared his throat, let her know he was there. But he was frozen, a statue of a husband in his own home. Then came the words he had been dreading, the words his father had warned him about, the words that had been a specter in his marriage for 3 long years. "Look, you don't have to keep reminding me," Kiara said, her voice dropping even lower. "You're just temporary. We both know it. He's a means to an end." The sentence wasn't for her mother. Darnell realized with a jolt of cold clarity that she was repeating what her mother had just said to her. But it didn't matter who originated it. Kiara had said it. Again. For the second time. The glass in Darnell's hand felt impossibly heavy. The world seemed to shrink down to the sound of his own blood roaring in his ears. Twice. His father's voice echoed from a memory 5 years old, as clear as if he were standing right beside him. "Son, you're a good man. A loyal man. But loyalty can be a blindfold. I'm giving you this house free and clear. But there's a condition. For your own protection. She has to prove she sees it as a home, not just a stepping stone. If she ever tells you you're temporary, you tell her that's a mistake. If she says it twice, you call Mr. Harris." Darnell backed away from the doorway, his movements silent and deliberate. He placed the glass on the small hall table with a hand that did not tremble, though his insides were a churning sea of ice and fire. He retreated to the living room, sinking into his worn, comfortable armchair, a $300 piece he'd bought a decade ago, a stark contrast to the sleek, uncomfortable $1,200 leather sofa Kiara had picked out. The room was dark, lit only by the faint blue glow of the cable box. He stared at the blank television screen, but he wasn't seeing it. He was seeing the notarized document locked in the small, fireproof safe in his closet. A promise made to a dying father. A promise kept. And a trigger, now pulled for the second and final time. The life he had been living was over. He had no idea what was coming next, only that he would face it with the quiet finality his father had taught him. The outrage was a cold, hard stone in his gut, but his face in the dim light was a mask of pure calm. The game was over. He just had to play out the last few moves. What his wife and mother-in-law didn't know was that their long-term plan had just run into a very sudden, very permanent dead end. And he, the temporary man, was about to become the most permanent thing in their lives. Have you ever been made to feel small in your own home? Let us know in the comments how you found the strength to stand up for yourself. The story of Darnell's quiet revolution is just beginning. The facade of their domestic life had been constructed with careful precision, mostly by Kiara. It was a stage set for an audience of her friends and, most importantly, her mother. Darnell's role was simple: to be the stable, reliable background character who funded the production. He remembered the argument over the dining room table. He had found a solid oak set at a local furniture store for $450, sturdy and practical. "Darnell, no. It looks like something from your father's house," Kiara had said, her nose wrinkled in distaste. "We need something that says, 'We've arrived.'" They ended up with an $800 glass and chrome set from a trendy boutique in the Central West End, a fragile thing that collected fingerprints and wobbled if you leaned on it too hard. Darnell paid for it from his savings, a fund he'd been building for emergency home repairs. Their life was a gallery of these small, expensive concessions. Her car was a new model Nissan Altima, a $28,000 vehicle with a monthly lease payment of $380 that made Darnell wince every time it was deducted from their joint account. He, meanwhile, drove his 2012 Toyota Camry with 187,000 miles on it, a car he maintained himself on weekends. "When are you going to get rid of that old thing?" her mother Brenda had asked once, looking at his Camry parked in the driveway as if it were a piece of trash. "It's embarrassing." Kiara had just stood there, silent, offering no defense. The house itself was a source of constant tension. It was a gift from his father, a man who had worked for 35 years at the same manufacturing plant to pay it off. It was Darnell's inheritance, his only real asset, valued at a solid $250,000. When they married, Darnell, in a gesture of love and trust, had put Kiara on the deed. His father, already ill, but with his mind as sharp as a razor, had been furious. "A man's home is his castle, son," his father had said, his voice raspy but firm. He was sitting in his favorite recliner, the one that now sat in Darnell's living room. "You don't just give away the keys to the kingdom." What has she brought to this table? A mountain of debt and a list of demands? "I love her, Dad," Darnell had replied, feeling like a foolish boy. Love is a verb. It's about what you do, how you build together. It's not about what you can get, his father countered. That's when he had called his lawyer, Mr. Harris. The document they drafted was his father's last act of protection. It was a conditional transfer of title. Darnell signed over his half of the property to his father, who then placed it in a trust. The trust's sole instruction was to revert the full title back to Darnell, and only Darnell, under one specific condition: the triggering of a clause. The clause was activated if two non-family witnesses, or Darnell himself, could attest that Kiara had, on two separate occasions, referred to him or his position in the home as temporary. The first time had been 3 years ago. They were hosting a small barbecue. Darnell was at the grill, the smoke clinging to his clothes, a cheap $15 apron tied around his waist. He was happy. Their friends were laughing, the sun was warm, and the smell of roasting chicken filled the air. Kiara and her mother were standing near the patio door, thinking they were out of earshot. He just overheard a snippet of their conversation as he went to grab more tongs. "He seems content with all this," Brenda had said, a dismissive wave of her hand indicating the pleasant, middle-class scene. "This little house, this little job." "It's fine for now, Mama," Kiara had replied, her voice smooth and placating. You have to see the big picture. This is just a starter phase. You're just temporary, we both know it. Once I finish my online certifications and get a real corporate job, we can move up. Clayton, maybe? This is all just temporary. The word had hit him like a physical blow. Temporary. He, his life, his father's home, it was all a placeholder. He confronted her later that night after everyone had left. The manufactured smiles were gone, and the exhaustion of performance had set in. I heard what you said to your mother, Kiara. She didn't even have the grace to look ashamed. She just looked annoyed. Oh, Darnell, don't be so dramatic. You know what she's like. I was just managing her. You said I was temporary. That this house was temporary. It's just talk, she'd said, waving a dismissive hand, the gesture so much like her mother's. Don't make a big deal out of nothing. He had let it go. He had swallowed the hurt and the anger because he loved her, and he wanted to believe she was just placating her overbearing mother. He wanted to believe the foundation was still strong. He had made a critical mistake. He had not understood that it wasn't just talk. It was the truth, spoken aloud. And now, 3 years later, she had said it again. The starter phase was apparently still in effect. He now understood that for Kiara, their marriage wasn't a partnership. It was a residency program, and he was just the landlord until she found a better place to live. The outrage didn't accumulate in a sudden explosion. It had been a slow, steady drip, eroding his self-worth piece by piece over 5 years. The escalating betrayal was a symphony conducted by Kiara, with her mother, Brenda, playing first violin. Brenda was a woman who measured the world in brand names and zip codes. She lived in a sleek, 2-bedroom luxury apartment in Clayton, the kind of place with a doorman and floor-to-ceiling glass windows that looked out over other glass towers. Her rent was a staggering $3,200 a month, a fact she mentioned often, a subtle but constant reminder of Darnell's perceived inadequacy. Brenda's visits to their North County home were like inspections. She would run a manicured finger over a dusty bookshelf or eye the scuff marks on the hardwood floors with a barely concealed grimace. Darnell, honey, she'd say, her voice dripping with faux sweetness, a man's home reflects his ambition. You have to think about appearances. One Saturday, Darnell was in the backyard, carefully tending to the small vegetable garden his father had started. The tomatoes were just beginning to ripen on the vine. It was his sanctuary, a place of peace. Kiara and Brenda came outside, dressed for a day of shopping. Brenda was wearing a $1,500 Burberry trench coat, even though it was a perfectly sunny day. What are you doing out here playing in the dirt? Brenda asked, looking at his soil-stained jeans and worn $60 work boots. It's a garden, Brenda. These will be our tomatoes in a few weeks, Darnell said, trying to keep his tone light. Oh, that's quaint, she said. Kiara, standing beside her, just smiled weakly. But really, Darnell, a man with a house this size should have a professional landscaping service. It's only about $200 a month. It's an investment in your property value. I like doing it myself, Darnell said, his jaw tightening. Of course you do, Brenda murmured, turning to Kiara. Come on, sweetie, we'll be late for our appointment at Neiman Marcus. I saw a handbag you'll just die for. Darnell watched them leave, Kiara glancing back at him with an apologetic shrug, as if he were the one being unreasonable. The handbag, a sleek leather tote, appeared the next day. It cost $450, charged to their joint credit card. When he questioned the expense, Kiara was ready with a defense. It was a gift from Mama, she'd said. She put it on our card, Kiara. She's going to pay me back. God, you scrutinize every little thing. It's suffocating, she'd snapped, storming out of the room. Brenda, of course, never paid her back. The humiliations were often public. At a dinner party with Kiara's friends, a circle of young professionals who talked about stock options and weekend trips to Napa, the conversation turned to careers. A man named Marcus, a financial analyst, was describing a big deal his firm had just closed. "And what about you, Darnell? What's new in your world?" Marcus asked, turning to him. Before Darnell could answer, Kiara jumped in. "Oh, Darnell keeps the world moving," she said, with a bright, false smile. "He works at a warehouse. It's very essential." The word essential was delivered with a slight sneer, as if it were a synonym for unimportant. The table went quiet for a moment. Darnell could feel the pitying looks. He just smiled politely and took a sip of his water. "It's a good job," he said quietly. "I work with good people." The rest of the evening, he was invisible. The conversation flowed around him, a river of talk about promotions, bonuses, and corporate politics he couldn't possibly understand. He was the designated driver, the silent partner, the man who owned the house they were in, but was somehow the least important person in the room. The cruelty wasn't always about money. It was about his very being. His taste in music was dated. His friends from the warehouse were rough. His idea of a nice evening, grilling in the backyard and watching a movie, was boring. "Why can't we do things?" Kiara would complain. "Go to gallery openings, try that new $200 a plate restaurant downtown. You have no ambition to experience life." "My ambition is to live a good life, Kiara, a peaceful life. Not to spend money we don't have to impress people we don't like," he once told her, his patience worn thin. "See, that's the problem right there," she had shot back. "That's your father talking. That small town, clock in, clock out mentality. I want more than that. I deserve more than that." The most cutting moments came when they discussed the future. Kiara was taking online courses for a project management certification, convinced it was her ticket out of her current $31,000 a year administrative assistant job and into a six-figure salary. Darnell supported her, paid for the $3,000 course fees without complaint, hoping it would bring her happiness, but her plans never seemed to include him. One evening, he walked into the bedroom and saw her scrolling through real estate listings on her laptop. Not in their area. She was looking at multi-million-dollar homes in Ladue. "Daydreaming?" he asked. Trying to sound playful, she slammed the laptop shut, startled. "Just looking, seeing what's out there." "Those places are in a different universe, Kai." "For you, maybe," she said coolly. "I'm planning for my future. You should try it sometime." Each comment, each dismissive gesture, each extravagant purchase on his dime was a drop of poison. He had been absorbing it for years, telling himself it was just Kiara's insecurity, her mother's influence. He thought his love and stability would be enough to anchor her, but after hearing her on the phone, he understood. He wasn't an anchor. He was ballast, meant to be jettisoned as soon as her ship was ready to sail. The accumulation of these betrayals no longer felt like 1,000 small cuts. It felt like a single, gaping wound. And he finally knew with absolute certainty that it was time to stop the bleeding. He had given her every chance to see him, to value him, to build a life with him. She had failed the test, twice. The night air of his own home had never felt so foreign. It was 10:41 p.m. The numbers on the microwave clock glowed a malevolent red. Darnell stood motionless in the hallway, the echo of Kiara's words. "You're just temporary, we both know it," reverberating in the silent space between his thoughts. The phrase wasn't an insult. It was a verdict. It was the final official confirmation of a truth he had refused to accept for years. He could hear the soft click of her wine glass as she set it on the granite countertop, the one he'd installed himself to save $800 on labor, a fact she conveniently forgot whenever she talked about the kitchen remodel. He heard the cheerful, dismissive tone she used to end the call with her mother. Okay, Mama. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Love you. Love. The word sounded hollow. A counterfeit coin dropped on a stone floor. He felt a sudden, profound coldness seep into his bones, a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air outside. It was the cold of absolute certainty, the warmth of hope, of denial, of the desperate belief that love could fix this had been extinguished completely. He took a slow, deliberate step back, melting deeper into the shadows of the hallway. He could not face her. Not now. If he walked into that kitchen, she would see it on his face. The 5 years of quiet humiliation, the thousands of dollars spent to placate her, the sting of 100 condescending remarks. It would all be there in his eyes. And the quiet, methodical finality his father had taught him to value would be lost to a storm of well-earned rage, strategic restraint. That was the key. He retreated down the hall to their bedroom. The room was neat, decorated in the neutral grays and whites Kiara favored, a style she'd copied from a magazine. It felt like a hotel room. His side of the bed was simple. A small wooden nightstand holding a lamp, a glass of water, and an old paperback. Her side was cluttered with bottles of expensive lotions and serums, a silk sleep mask, and a $150 aromatherapy diffuser that puffed a cloying lavender scent into the air. He moved to the closet and knelt down. Behind a row of his neatly folded work jeans, there was a small, black fireproof safe. It was a Sentry safe, a $150 model he'd bought after his father passed. His fingers, usually so steady from years of manual work, fumbled slightly with the combination. 8/16/54, his father's birthday. The lock clicked open. Inside were the essential documents of his life. The deed to the house, before he'd foolishly added her name, his father's will, his own birth certificate,